Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
If you get outside to enjoy Canadian nature, you've probably been warned about ticks. But perhaps not with all the right information. The situation is evolving. For instance, you've definitely been told about Lyme disease, but maybe not about the other illnesses ticks can spread. And you've probably been told to be careful in the forest or when you're out for a hike in nature, but maybe not that ticks can be found in your own backyard. You've probably been told to do a quick tick check, but maybe not the most important places to check. Or you've been warned to watch out for ticks during the summer months, and not that they can be found basically any time of year that's not freezing. The tick problem this year is worse than last year, and so much worse than it was just a decade ago. So think of today as your friendly, big story PSA. Share it with friends and family. This is everything you need to know about ticks in Canada in 2024 and what we can do about it, because this problem's not going away. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Dr. Laura Ferguson is a biologist and an assistant professor at Acadia University, where she is researching ways to curb what I guess is an exploding tick population, Laura.
It sure is, yes.
Why don't you start maybe by giving us a sense of how quickly this is growing? Because take us back, I don't know, maybe a decade or so, and where in Canada were ticks typically found?
Yeah, a great question. So, interestingly enough, and something that we sometimes don't think too much about, is that there have been ticks in Canada for a long time, just maybe not the ticks that we're getting more familiar with these days. So we have about 40-ish different species of ticks in Canada that feed on different kinds of animals. And of course, the ones that we are seeing more of now and the ones that we really care about as humans are the ones that are feeding on us. So about a decade or so ago, I'd say the problem was starting to grow already. We were seeing that, especially in the southern parts of Canada, that we were starting to see a rise in the population of the infamous black-legged ticks, or Ixodes scapularis. And prior to that, even a decade or so prior to that, there wasn't much here in terms of ticks that were feeding on people and causing much of a stir. Certainly we had little isolated populations and bites here and there. But yeah, it's really over the last couple of decades that we've seen these populations really start to explode, especially in these sort of southeastern parts of the country.
And how is their habitat changing now, or has changed recently? And, what kinds of populations are we seeing now?
Yeah, so we're really seeing big populations or population growth, I should say, in these black-legged ticks in particular. We also see some growth in populations like our dog ticks here on the East Coast. So changes in those two species in particular, and also some range expansion that we're expecting in some other exotic species that might make their way up. But in terms of sort of habitat or what's encouraging that, it's a variety of different things. So certainly climate change is contributing to the growth of these populations, all of the warming that we're experiencing, because ticks are what we call ectotherms. And so really what that means is that however warm it is outside, that's how warm the inside of their body is. And everything that happens inside of their body that leads to how they grow and how many babies they produce and all those kinds of things is dependent on temperature. So when it's warmer outside, everything happens a little bit faster so they can develop a little bit more quickly and get to that next life stage a little bit more quickly so they have time to find a host. They might be able to make a few more babies. And then really importantly, of course, what's been sort of our protection in Canada has been our winters. And we're really seeing a big change there. Winter with climate change is going to be a season where we see some of the most dramatic impacts of temperature, where we're going to see really big shifts in those average temperatures and temperature variability. Mm-hmm. So we have longer growing seasons. Our fall or autumn time is now warmer and longer. Spring sometimes is coming a little bit earlier in some areas. So we have shorter winters, so they're not exposed to cold for as long. And of course, cold for an animal like that, like I said, they're an ectotherm, which also means that when it's cold outside, they're cold inside their bodies. And that can also cause some damage over time, or if they freeze, that's not so good for them.
Right.
And so historically, that's killed them and kept them at bay. But now with less severe winters in some areas and shorter winters, that's making things a little bit more habitable for them.
In terms of where they're found, not necessarily geographically, but I think myself and probably most people listening would have previously associated ticks with, outdoors in the woodland, right? Like you're out in fields, forests, places with tall grass, that kind of stuff. I have heard this summer anecdotes about them being found in big cities, like in people's backyards or in the parks where kids are playing. Do we know if that's actually happening on a level that we can take note of, or would you be surprised to hear that? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of if this is fear-mongering or what.
Well, unfortunately not. So we definitely do. We do find ticks in big cities, and there's a publicly available app called eTick.
Okay.
And this is a really incredible resource for something that we call passive surveillance of ticks, and also just generally a great resource for people in the community. So it's an app that you can download on your phone, or you can look for it in your browser. And, if you find a tick, you take a picture of it, you upload it. There are people who are trained to identify ticks who get your picture, and they tell you, this is the species of tick you have and whether you need to be worried about it, that sort of thing. So if you were to pop on eTick right now, for instance, and you zoom in on, say, Montreal or Toronto or wherever that you are thinking of as a larger city, you'll see all kinds of submissions from these areas. Now, some of them, potentially, sometimes they come from somebody who was traveling somewhere else, went out to the countryside for the weekend and came back and found them on them. But definitely there are lots of reports from people's backyards and cities. And that's, partially due to the fact that in these areas, first of all, ticks can get into them because we know that wildlife comes into these areas as well. And so birds are passing through and dropping off ticks. We have small mammals like mice, for instance, that really thrive in cities, and they're a great host for ticks. And so they can move in through cities, and then ticks get into people's yards that way. Squirrels, all of those kinds of small animals that we cohabitate with in our more urban environments are also things that ticks are looking for. So it's not really shocking that we're going to find them in some city environments as well.
I think most people, when they worry about ticks, associate it primarily with Lyme disease. So let's just maybe start there. Which ticks carry Lyme disease? How do you know which tick you're dealing with if you find one on yourself or your kids?
Yeah, so primarily we're concerned with the black-legged tick, or Ixodes scapularis, for transmitting Lyme disease to humans. And so in terms of trying to know if you have a black-legged tick on you, or how you can try and figure that out, at least, definitely I would say it is important for everyone to, just pop online and take a quick look at pictures of these ticks. They're pretty small, right? Especially in what we call the nymph stage, which is one of their juvenile stages that precedes them being an adult. They're tiny, right? They're like poppy seed kind of size. And so they can be really difficult to find, and it can be really hard to tell what species it is at that stage. As they get a little bit bigger, you can see that in the females especially, they've got kind of a reddish-brown color to them that can sort of help you distinguish. But again, it's really important to either have, if you haven't had any experience sort of distinguishing between species, getting someone to help you out with it.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, that app, eTick, has been really useful across Canada for allowing people access to identification services. So, using a picture, all you have to do is have your phone and be able to take a decent picture on your phone of the tick, whether it fed on you or not. And then people are trained in that identification and can let you know what species you have.
Why are people so worried about Lyme? Give us the quick explainer on what it actually is.
Right. So Lyme is caused by a species of bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi. So it's a bacterial infection that gets into your body, essentially. And, for some people, it can be pretty mild. For others, you're going to get symptoms ranging from things like, headache, fever, chills, those kinds of things. And then if it's left untreated, it can worsen over time, right? And so, if you hop onto, say, the CDC website or that sort of thing, it has a great list of all of the different symptoms that it can cause. but it can lead to more chronic or long-term problems, arthritis and Bell's palsy and other issues with inflammation throughout the body if we're talking about a more systemic kind of infection with the bacteria. So it can be really debilitating for people and in some cases can lead to mortality as well.
Is that the only disease or illness that ticks can cause? I think I've heard a lot this summer that I'd never heard before about something called anaplasmosis. What's that?
Yeah, that's the other tricky thing about ticks is that they carry a lot of different stuff in them. And these black-legged ticks happen to have a few different things that we're concerned about for people. And so anaplasmosis being a disease that's also caused by a bacteria, in this case, Anaplasma phagocytophilum. And so we have less of this bacteria in our ticks that we sample than we see, for instance, of the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. But we're seeing some signs that that's on the rise throughout Canada. So again, another bacterial infection that causes kind of these headache, fever, chills, that kind of thing. And then can become more severe if it's not treated with antibiotics. So leading to things eventually like respiratory failure or organ failure, that kind of awfulness, really.
What are we doing in light of the recent explosion to actively control tick populations? How do we try to manage them?
So in terms of controlling our tick populations, it's tough. It's tough. They really like to find little niches to hide in.
Mm-hmm.
There's a variety of things that, individuals do. And some things that we just sort of guide against would be things like trying to apply a lot of pesticides to your lawn, so permethrins and those kinds of things in an attempt to try and control ticks in your area. These are going to have a lot of off-target effects on other kinds of insects, for instance, that are really important to our ecosystems, and actually also maybe some other critters that might feed on ticks that you might not want to get rid of as well. So, we're looking for a lot of different options through what people would call an integrated pest management approach. So can we find ways of trying to control tick populations, potentially through some of these pesticides, but also through controlling the environment and trying to also use education to help reduce contact with tick bites, that kind of thing. And then a lot of it has to do with prevention. So trying to make sure that, so for instance, in your own yard, keeping your grass trimmed, that kind of thing, and ensuring that you don't have a lot of habitat around, maybe especially close to your house for things like mice. So if you're able to keep sort of your yard and area tidy and grass clipped and that kind of thing, I'll put a little caveat in there that that's also not to say that you shouldn't also try and grow things in your yard. So, if you're trying to also have a vegetable garden or, if you're interested like I am in native plant gardening, that kind of thing. Those are also really important ways of contributing to the ecosystem. We talk about this as a One Health approach, right? So we're not looking to just sort of scorched earth here to get rid of ticks, just cut everything down and just be like tiny little bits of blades of grass everywhere. So certainly all of those kinds of things are fine to do. And it's very important to promote that kind of plant biodiversity in your landscape to support all of the other critters that we do actually want to have around as well.
And you and your colleague, I guess, are doing some research now into a way to maybe replace some of those pesticides that you mentioned. Can you explain what you guys are up to?
So it is this portion of the tick control work led primarily by my colleague, Dr. Nicoletta Farione. She's over in the chemistry department here at Acadia. And so we work together on tick control and understanding tick biology in general from a couple of different perspectives. And so we've got a couple of different projects on the go, and we're also working, again, with a great colleague and collaborator at Dalhousie University, Dr. Shelley Adamo, on a couple of different things. So first of all, Dr. Farione works on essential oils and other kinds of tick repellents and acaricides to control them. So a whole suite of different things trying to, kind of contribute to that arsenal. And a couple of things that we've been involved with recently are things like balsam fir essential oils, as well as naturally occurring fungus in the environment that might help control ticks as well. So we published a paper a few years ago, or a couple of years ago now, I guess, on the impacts of balsam fir essential oils. And so, for instance, like your Christmas tree, the needles that come off of a tree contain an essential oil that we did find had some lethal activity against ticks. And so, there's work done to try and now understand if that can be actually used in an applied setting. And then we also have this fungus that we're working on as well and trying to understand if we can, just how many ticks this fungus might kill and who can we apply it against and whether that would help us control these populations. And, there's a lot still to be answered there in terms of whether there would be any off-target effects on, the critters that we do care about having around, like our pollinators and all kinds of other insects and soil arthropods and those kinds of things that are really important for the ecosystem.
What are some things that you would recommend as a tick expert that people can do practically if they're still planning to get out there in cottage country and the woods and et cetera, this summer?
Yeah. So again, prevention and being proactive against ticks is your best bet. So we talk about things like, your first thing is to try and stay away from tick-heavy areas. But of course, we also don't want to, like you said earlier, fearmonger. We don't want to prevent people from going outside and enjoying the outdoors. That's really, really important. So wearing light-colored clothing is going to be one way that you can make sure that you're going to see a tick if it's on you really quickly, because typically they're somewhat dark-bodied. And so if you wear sort of white or light-colored clothing, it's a little bit easier to see one that's starting to crawl up your arm or your leg before it actually has a chance to attach to you. If you really are going to be in a tick-heavy area, especially if you're encountering black-legged ticks, and the season for these black-legged ticks is really heavy, sort of April through early June, and then again in the fall, kind of late September, right through November. And so in those times, especially if you're spending a lot of time outside, if you are going to encounter a lot of ticks, we do recommend still a DEET-based repellent that you can apply to your clothing, and that's going to help repel the ticks before you even encounter them, so they won't attach to you. They don't like the smell of it, essentially. And so that can help keep them off of you. Tick checks are really important. So if you've been outside, when you come in, a couple of different things you can do. Take your clothes off from outside because you might still have a tick crawling around your clothes that hasn't attached to you yet. Throw them in the dryer, 20 minutes. That will be enough heat to kill the tick. The other thing that you're going to want to do is maybe hop in the shower for yourself. That could wash off a loose tick that's still crawling around your body. And then do your tick checks. So they like crevices, right? Ticks thrive on your body in dark, warm, humid locations. So sometimes those are the spots that might be hard to check yourself. But if you've got someone that can help you out, then that's always beneficial. But even just helping yourself by running your hands over your body as well. If maybe you're going to hop out of the shower and put some moisturizer on or that kind of thing, that's going to help. Your fingertips will at least give you some indication if you can't see in that area very well. It's going to give you some indication if you can feel something there that shouldn't maybe be there, even if it's small. So, checking the crooks of your elbows, the backs of your knees, behind your ears, your hairline, groin, belly button, toes, those kinds of things. All of the little crevices on your body are going to be the places that you want to pay particular attention to, though it is good to just check everywhere.
Yeah. What do you do if you find one and you're concerned about it, aside from, obviously, as you mentioned, like checking the app to make sure it's not the dangerous kind?
Yeah. So if you do find a tick on you, save it. That's the big thing. And I think I'm going to jump off a little bit here in terms of tick removal. I think it's a little bit off from what you asked, but I do want to mention that in terms of removing ticks, if you do have a tick that has bitten you and it's embedded, the best way to remove that tick is to get a nice pair of fine tipped tweezers or forceps, put those right up near the skin, right where the tick has its mouth parts inserted into your skin, and then just pull back gently but firmly from the base of the skin there and pull it right out. There's a lot of different methods online that are listed for removing ticks, but some of them can actually end up being a little bit dangerous. Part of the tick might be left behind in you and can cause an infection. So that's really the tried, tested, and approved method for tick removal, is getting one of those fine-tipped pair of forceps and just gently, right next to the skin, pull straight out and get that tick out of you. Once you've got it out, or if you did just find one crawling on you and it hasn't taken any blood from you, it's still good to save it. Put it in a Ziploc bag or a little jar or something like that and just stick it in your freezer. Being in your freezer for a couple of days is going to kill the tick as well. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure that you get in touch with somebody who's able to identify the tick and let you know if you need antibiotics, for instance. So, for instance, in Nova Scotia, we know that our pharmacists here are able to do some tick identification, and they will also prescribe some prophylactic antibiotics. And so you can go in, you can take a tick in if it's been on you, and your pharmacist can say, okay, here's a couple of days of antibiotics. Let's try and get ahead of this infection. You, of course, can also take it to your doctor, right? And so especially if you find that tick and you've waited a few days, go to your doctor. And then, of course, that app as well is also going to be really helpful for just helping people identify. So if it's a tick that hasn't bitten you, if it was just sort of crawling around on you, then I would say just go ahead and upload it to eTick and see what species you have. And then it'll just help your awareness in general of the ticks in your area.
Laura, thank you so much for this. This is great, really practical information for people.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Dr. Laura Ferguson of Acadia University. That was The Big Story. For more from us, head to thebigstorypodcast.ca. Send us, please, your suggestions for episodes, especially if you think we should do more PSAs like this one. The way to get in touch with us is via email, hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca, or with a phone call and a voicemail that you can leave at 416-935-5935. We're available in all of your podcast players, and if you like one and you don't find us there, let us know. We'll be in it in a flash. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.